pulpit today? Or is it the same as last week?
It's the same.
Oh, seems taller. Or maybe I'm getting short. Which happens when you're old like me. All right. Wisdom and work is missed. The Control Freak's Guide to Joy. This is part 5. We've been going through the book of Ecclesiastes, and one of the main things we're seeing in the book of Ecclesiastes is that we are not in control. We cannot be control freaks. But we can have joy even though we don't have control, because God is God and we're not. Last week we saw that pleasure is missed. It can be and is a gift of God that is often abused. Pleasure is a gift, but it's often abused. As I've said before, there's an old Latin phrase, which I don't know how to pronounce properly, but it's probably said this way. Abusus non tollit usum. Abusus non tollit usum. Which means abuse does not cancel use. In other words, misuse or abuse of something that can even be a gift from God is no argument against its proper use. Just because something is abused, even if it's a good gift from God Himself, doesn't mean it's an argument against its proper use. The abuse of something should not negate its proper and God-ordained use of it. Or as Martin Luther put it, do not suppose that abuses are eliminated by destroying the object which is abused. Men can go wrong with wine and women. Shall we then prohibit and abolish women? The sun, the moon, and the stars have been worshipped. Shall we then pluck them out of the sky? That's what Martin Luther said. Fire can destroy, but it is also good for cooking, right? Fire can cause a lot of damage, but it can also be used for cooking and keeping you warm, especially in the winter. A modern variation of that old Latin principle is don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? A hammer can be used in a good way and in a bad way. A hammer can be used to build a house, or a hammer can be used to destroy a house, to tear it down. It can actually be used as a murder weapon. Did you know that? A hammer can be used as a murder weapon. I don't know that from experience, but I've heard. The Apostle Paul had a similar point. He said, all things are lawful, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful, but not all things build up. 1 Corinthians 10:23. The misuse of something is no argument against its proper use. Just because something is misused doesn't mean it shouldn't be used. Christians have used grace to justify lawlessness. They've used grace to justify licentiousness. So should we reject grace? Right? Just because grace is abused or misused as an excuse to justify lawlessness or licentiousness, should we just get rid of grace? Grace is the problem, right? Grace must be the problem. Christians have tried this over and over again. The lawless like to point out the error of legalism in order to cling to their lawlessness. And the legalists like to point out the error of lawlessness in order to cling to their lawlessness. Just because something is abused doesn't mean it shouldn't be used to the glory of God, right? It should all be to the glory of God. Whether you eat or drink, may it all be to the glory of God. Grace can be used and abused. Grace can be an excuse, but it should be a reason to gratefully obey the law. I teach logic in the classical Christian school locally here, and this violates one or more of the logical fallacies. Think about the following fallacious syllogism. So this is a fallacy. This is a syllogism that is a fallacy. Some case of X did something wrong. Number 2, therefore all X's are bad. Number 3, we should get rid of X's, right? It's a classical example of the fallacy of composition. It's called the fallacy of composition. Just because some individual members of a group exhibited a negative trait, it does not logically follow that the entire group possesses that same trait. One cannot infer characteristics of the whole from observations about parts. This commits the fallacy of composition by assuming that what is true of some must be true of all. And this is one of my son Noah's favorite fallacies. He always brings up this fallacy of composition. Right? Some hardcore feminists might demonstrate it this way. Some men are bad. Number 2, certainly all men are evil. 3, we should get rid of men, or at least force men to stop being men. That's the fallacy of composition. It's also called the part-to-whole fallacy. It's the error of assuming that what is true of the parts must also be true of the whole. As an example, it's like saying you cannot drown in a single drop of water. I think we can all agree with that. You're not going to drown in a single drop of water. And the ocean is made of many drops of water, therefore you cannot drown in the ocean. That's a fallacy. I came close to that actually when I was in the Caribbean on a cruise ship. We went on a cruise to the Caribbean islands because it was paid for us by our company that we used to be a part of. And I was swimming out in the ocean. Can you imagine me swimming out in the ocean? It was warm. The most awesome thing about the Caribbean island was that the water, the ocean was actually warm. It was like a hot tub. It was like, woo-hoo! And I was going out, and I started getting caught by the current and being pulled out. I've heard about this, but I'd never experienced it until then. And I was getting pulled further and further out and away. And there was a lifeguard, and he was blowing his whistle at me, saying, "Get back here." Woo! I was like, I can't help it. It's like, what are you whistling and telling me to do what I can't do? And I remembered, you go sideways with the current and then move forward. Anyways, that was my experience in the ocean, knowing that even though you can't drown in a drop of water doesn't mean you can't drown in the ocean, which is made up of many drops of water. It's also like saying every part of this machine is light in weight, therefore the whole machine is light in weight. That's a fallacy. If the front seat in your car is made of a cushion, the whole car must be a cushion. Right? That's the fallacy of composition, part to whole. Assuming something that is true of the part must be true of the whole. This is also a violation of what is called in logic the fallacy of hasty generalization. Hasty generalization. When you make a hasty generalization on the basis of too few examples, right? You just jump to a conclusion based on a few similar examples. If you've never seen a school bus, and the first bus that you see is actually blue, right? If you see a blue school bus, and you just assume or jump to the conclusion or hasty generalization that all school buses must be blue, because I saw a blue school bus. Well, that's hasty generalization. Just because someone abuses pleasure or joy doesn't mean that pleasure and joy are bad things. I grew up, my siblings grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, where it's ridiculously hot and stupid hot. But one thing my mother would have remembered and reminded us was that it actually snowed in Phoenix, Arizona on Troy's birthday, which is April 21st, right? It snowed in April 21st in Phoenix, Arizona, which is stupid hot, usually. It would be a violation of the fallacy of hasty generalization to conclude that in April in Phoenix, Arizona, it will probably snow just because it once snowed at that time, right? That's hasty generalization. So when we think of pleasure, we automatically think of it as a bad thing. We think of it as fleshly, as of the flesh. But as I said last week, both pleasure and pain are gifts. Pleasure and pain are gifts from God. Just because we in our sin can abuse and misuse pleasure, just because we can misuse and abuse pain, doesn't mean that they are inherently bad things. Even the pleasure of sex is a gift from God when it's in the context of a covenant marriage and one woman, one man, monogamy relationship. But obviously, in that case, it could be abused, it could be misused. But the point Solomon is making in Ecclesiastes is that pleasure is a mist. It's vapor. It cannot be held onto. It cannot be grabbed onto. It cannot be manipulated. It cannot be controlled. It is often unmanageable. It is fleeting. It can be a gift that the Lord chooses to give, or it can be a gift that the Lord chooses to take away. It's not in our grasp. We can't control it. It's something God can give. It's something God can take away. Today in our text, we're going to see the same thing about wisdom and work. Wisdom and work. Just as pleasure is missed, so is wisdom and work. It can't be grabbed onto. It can't be manipulated. It can't be managed. It can't be controlled. It's a mist. It's a vapor. They're not bad things. Wisdom and work is not bad, right? Wisdom and work is a good thing. But they are things that don't necessarily give us an advantage, right, in life. It doesn't give us an advantage because God is sovereign and we are not. And that's the main point. God is sovereign. He is God. We are not. He's in control. We're not necessarily in control. But we can have joy. And that's what we're seeing in the book of Ecclesiastes is that it doesn't, if you're a control freak, you can still have joy when you know that God is sovereign and you're not. We don't necessarily determine when it's our time for war or our time for peace, or when it's our time to weep or our time to mourn. We don't necessarily decide that, which we're going to talk about next week, because we don't have ultimate control of the times we are in. We're not in control of the times. We're not in control of the times, but we should be like the sons of Issachar, who were, quote, men who had understanding of the times, to know what Israel ought to do, as it says in 1 Chronicles 12:32. As we'll see today, Solomon had more wisdom than any of us, probably most of us combined. And all the work he did, which was probably more than any of us have done, was just vapor. It was just striving, he says, after the wind. Being wise is not enough. Working hard is not enough. That's my excuse for not being wise and not working hard. Just kidding. That's a joke. God is the one on the throne, and our times are in his hands. He determines what times we are in. We can enjoy it, but we can't always control it, right? We can enjoy it, but we can't always control it. It's like a roller coaster, right? You know, people lift their hands on a roller coaster. Woo! You're out of control on a roller coaster, right? That's the whole point of it. You're going up and down and upside down, and some people just enjoy it. They just raise their hands like, praise God, I'm on a roller coaster, right? So that's kind of how life is. Just raise up your hands. You're going to go up, you're going to go down. You can't control it. Enjoy it. That's life. That's what Ecclesiastes is all about. Life is a roller coaster. Just get over yourself. Get over the fact that you're not in control. Just raise up your hands and praise to God because, woohoo, this is a good ride. That wasn't in my notes. We can enjoy it, but we can't control it. We can have joy in the vapor, but we can't always be in control. We can choose to be a control freak or letting go and letting God. Now, I didn't want to use that phrase in this series because it's a cliche thing, you know, let go and let God. I have the bumper sticker, let go and let God. But you know what? That's kind of the message of the book of Ecclesiastes is let it go, let go. You're not in control. You don't let God do anything. He's sovereign. You're not. So you don't let God. In that sense, it's not true. But he's God. You're not. Accept it. Lift your hands. Enjoy the ride. Right? That's Ecclesiastes. So with all that being said, let's all stand in reverence for the reading of our text from God's holy, living, inspired, infallible, and inerrant word. Ecclesiastes chapter 2, starting in verse 12. So I turned to consider wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man do who comes after the king? Only what has already been done. Then I saw that there is more gain in wisdom than in folly, as there is more gain in light than in darkness. The wise person has his eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet I perceive that the same event happens to all of them. Then I said in my heart, what happens to the fool will happen to me also. Why then have I been so very wise? And I said in my heart that this is also vanity or vapor. For of the wise, as of the fool, there's no enduring remembrance, seeing that in the days to come, all will have been long forgotten. How the wise dies just like the fool. So I hated life, because what is done under the sun was grievous to me, for all is vanity, all is vapor, and a striving after wind. I hated all my toil in which I toil under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to the man who will come after me. All this work, right, all this toil, I'm just going to leave it to whoever comes after me. 19, verse 19, and who knows whether he will be wise or a fool, yet he will be master of all, for which I toiled and used my wisdom under the sun. This also is vanity. This also is vapor. So I turned about and gave my heart up to despair over all the toil of my labors under the sun. Because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it, did not work for it. This also is vapor and a great evil. What has a man from all the toil and striving of heart with which he toils beneath the sun? For all his days are full of sorrow, his work is vexation. Even in the night, his heart does not rest. This also is vanity, it's vapor. There is nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil and his work. This also I saw is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? For the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner, he's given the business of gathering and collecting, only to give to one who pleases God. This also is vanity, it's vapor, and a striving after the wind. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
You may be seated. Again, this is what the very first verses in our text says. So I turned to consider wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man do who comes after the king? Solomon was the king. He says, what can you do? What can a man do who comes after the king? Only what has already been done. Then I saw that there is more gain in wisdom than in folly, as there is more gain in light than in darkness. The wise person has his eyes in his head. Isn't that a good phrase? The wise person has his eyes in his head. But the fool walks in darkness. And yet I perceived, Solomon says, I perceived in my wisdom that the same event happens to all of them. Whether you're wise or you're foolish, you're dead. You're going to die. I think that's what he's saying. You can be a genius or a goober, as Katrina likes to say. But that doesn't give you an advantage. It doesn't give you control over the outcome of your life, right? It doesn't matter how smart you are. It doesn't matter how dumb you are. You're not in control. You are not the one who's written your story. God is sovereign. You're not. As Jeff Myers put it in his book on Ecclesiastes called A Table in the Mist, says this: Solomon confesses that in some ways wisdom is preferable to folly, right? Yeah, I guess it's better to have wisdom than be an idiot, to be folly, foolishness. He continues, then I saw that there is more gain in wisdom than in folly. Ecclesiastes 2:13. But this is a statement of faith. That's actually, Myers says, is a statement of faith, not of sight or experience. Ultimately, one also finds the pursuit of wisdom is mere myth. I came to realize that the same fate awaits them both. Ecclesiastes 2:14. Death, as the book unfolds, Solomon comes face to face with death, man's universal and unavoidable end, the culmination of God's burdening man with painful work, quote unquote. The shepherd king contemplates his own death in 2:15 and asks himself the question, why should I be wise? Why should I be wise? What advantage does the wise man or woman have then? He answers it, quote, this too is vapor, mysterious, impossible to grasp or understand. Myers continues, remember, Solomon is not saying that wisdom is meaningless, but that the meaning eludes man. He exhorts us to follow his example and arrive at the same conclusion. For what can the man do who comes after the king? Only what has already been done. That's Jeff Myers. And I love verse 14 because it's so real. All right, it's so relative. That's a good word that everybody likes to use. The wise person has his eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet I perceive that the same event happens to all of them. You can be the wisest guy ever, as Solomon was, and you're still dead. You're still not around. He's no longer with us. I don't know if you guys know that or not. 10 out of 10 of us, even though we think we're wise, will die. You can be a super genius. You can be wise. You can be the wisest. You still can't. You can't survive, right? You're going to die. If anything is final, it's death. It doesn't matter how smart you are, you're definitely going to do it, right? I'm sorry to shock some of you, but it's going to happen. It's going to happen. Verses 14 through 17 says, the wise person has his eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness, and yet I perceive that the same event happens to all of them. Then I said in my heart, what happens to the fool will happen to me also. Why then have I been so very wise? And I said, my wise? I kind of sound like, what's his name, the actor? Huh? Christopher Walken. Yeah. That sounds like Christopher Walken. I'm wise. Everybody imitates his voice. But I never tried it before until now. I'm really wise. Okay. Then I said in my heart, what happens to the fool will happen to me also. Why then have I been so very wise? And I said in my heart, this also is vanity. It's vapor. For of the wise, as of the fool, there is no enduring remembrance, seeing that in the days to come all will have been long forgotten. How the wise dies just like the fool. So I hated life because what is done under the sun was grievous to me, for all is vanity, all is vapor, and a striving after the wind. Woohoo! So wisdom is not enough. It doesn't matter how smart you are, you're still going to die like everyone else. What happens to the fool will happen to me also, says Solomon. Why then have I been so very wise? It's vapor. In the bigger picture, it's all vapor. It's uncontrollable. We're in His plan. It's not our plan, it's His plan. He is sovereign. God is in control. We are not. And the ultimate reminder of that is death. Solomon is acknowledging that wisdom and work is ephemeral? I don't even know how to say that word. Ephemeral? Is that how you say it? It's fleeting. Ephemeral, yeah. Why did I write that if I couldn't even pronounce it? It's ephemeral. It cannot give us any leverage. It doesn't give us any advantage. It's vapor. It's mist. It's ephemeral. Wisdom is good, but in the end, it's really just striving after the wind. And there's nothing to be gained. Another thing that is good is music, right? We all think music is good. But that also can be abused, right? Music, it can be so abused and misused. I was watching some videos on social media. Forgive me, but it was on Taylor Swift. On Swiftie, on her, is it called Eras tour? She's just worshipped. And so for some reason, some demonic reason, she's become just huge. And why am I talking about her? I was just watching fans of hers. It's been that way since back when Elvis was and Michael Jackson. You just watch the fans and they're just crying and they're just, they're so excited they see Taylor Swift. And they're like 100 miles away in the nosebleed section in their stadium, and they just see a little tiny glimpse of her, and they start crying, and they're just shaking, and it's just worship. It is. It's worship. What am I talking about that for? It's just like music. It can become an idol. Anything can become an idol. Good things, bad things obviously are idols, but even good things. What's going on? I see all the guys going to every window. Should I duck? Music is a gift, but it can become an idol. Everything can become an idol. In fact, as Calvin said, our heart is an idol-making factory. We're pros at making idols out of all things. Anyone who tries to grab onto it, find leverage with it, will quickly find that it is simply vapor. It's mist. Everything cool? Okay. Because I'm not packing for a reason. For no reason. I'm not. Okay, Ecclesiastes 2, verse 18 says, I hated all my toil, which I toil under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to the man who come after me. To the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he will be wise or a fool. Everything I work for, he's saying, everything I work for and all my wisdom and all the work and the hard labor I put into it, who knows who's going to take it? I'm going to be gone, and it's going to be left to either a genius or an idiot. Right? That's what he's saying. Who knows whether he will be wise or a fool? Yet he will be master of all for which I toiled, for which I worked for. He might be a complete fool, but he's going to be the master of everything I did, everything I worked for, everything I labored for, and use my wisdom under the sun. This also is vapor. It's out of my control. The ESV says vanity, but it's vapor. It's mist. It's outside of our control. Because, he says in verse 21, because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it. You put all this wisdom, you put all this work, you put all this knowledge and skill into everything that you've gained. And it says, this also is vapor. It's a great evil. What has a man from all the toil and striving of heart with which he toils beneath the sun? For all his days are full of sorrow, and his work is a vexation. Even in the night, his heart does not rest. This also is vapor. Woohoo! Again, Jeff Myers puts it this way. Solomon is not being impious when he declares, I hated life and I hated all my toil in which I toil under the sun. Solomon is being pious to hate life. After all, loving life for the sake of the power of his toil would demonstrate that he lacked faith and was embracing idolatrous delusions rather than trusting God. So Myers is saying it's actually hating life that is showing that he trusts God because he knows he's not in control of it. He continues, people develop idolatrous expectations of life by ignoring or discounting death. Death is an escapable message from God, and it's not good news. While this seems obvious, it is resisted. Many commonly attempt to escape the real implications of death by claiming that one's work will be carried on or enjoyed by someone else. However, what happens after death is completely outside our control. I think we can all agree with that, right? What happens after death, it's all outside of our control, which is a reminder that even before death, it's all outside of our control. He continues, I must leave it to the man who will come after me, and who knows whether he will be wise or a fool. He's quoting verse 18 and 19. Solomon rejects all false hope, all idolatry that would evade the vaporous nature of life when it comes to man's labor. That's Myers. Doesn't matter how hard you work or how much you work or how smart you are at your work, how wise you are. It's all vapor. It's all vapor. All your hard work will eventually be enjoyed by someone else who didn't work for it. And that's what Paul's saying. All this stuff, he had it all. He could have been on Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, right? Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. But he had it all. But after he died, someone else had it. It didn't matter if it's an idiot or another wise man. It'll be enjoyed by someone who didn't work for it. Because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it, who didn't work for it. This also is vapor and a great evil, he says. J. Adams, in his commentary on Ecclesiastes, says this: how does Solomon's doctrine differ from that of the famous lame Stoic Epictetus? I don't know how you say his name. Let's say it this way: Epictetus. Epictetus. Adams continues. The latter believe that the ideal is a state of apathos, which I somewhat freely translate as a state of little or no emotion. Apathos. Is that how you say it? Apathos? I don't know how to say anything today. Either positive or negative. Today we might refer to it as a constant state of homeostasis. Why did I put this quote in here? Homeostasis. If one never allows himself to become excited or upset, but accepts whatever happens, no matter how good or bad, with perfect equanimity. Okay, this is ridiculous. Equanimity. Life will be serene. I think I said that right. I make myself LOL. Like JK, LOL, rolling. Okay. Not only is this teaching idealistic and impossible to follow, in fact, you forgot everything I read already, so that's one of the reasons it's impossible to follow. But it is also dead wrong biblically. God gave us every emotion to express properly under the appropriate conditions, even if you can't read the words you're talking about. He continues, Adams. I hope I can read the rest of it. Solomon's viewpoint differs radically. He believed that deep disappointment, vexation of spirit, and the like are natural responses to a world in which nothing lasts or ultimately satisfies. But he also believed that blessings in this life that one legitimately derives from God, from God's hand, should be enjoyed to the full. And having eternity in his heart and the hope of a righteous judgment in his future, the believer may rejoice throughout all his days if he fears God and keeps his commandments, as we'll see later on in Ecclesiastes. When God, Adam says, created man with his emotions, he intended all of them to be expressed. Emotion, even high emotion, is not wrong. but it must be aroused by proper biblical concerns and must be expressed in proper biblical ways. Okay, I made it through. That's Adams. Thank you. I'll be here all night. As it says in our text, what has a man from all his toil and striving of heart, which he toils beneath the sun, for all his days are full of sorrow, and his work is of vexation. Even in the night, his heart does not rest. This also is vapor. Then it continues, Ecclesiastes 2:24 through 26. I'll close with this. There's nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. He should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil and his work. This also I saw is from the hand of God. This is God's gift. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? Apart from God, what can you eat? What can you enjoy? It's all his gift. This is all the gift of God. For to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner, he has given the business of gathering and collecting, only to give to the one who pleases God. This also is vanity. This also is vapor and a striving after wind. Now to the King, eternal, immortal, invisible, to God who alone is wise, be honor and glory forever and ever. Amen. Please stand. Let's pray together.